Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Above My Pay Grade. I have Adam DeRito from the Dark Saber podcast back on. We had a great conversation last time about all things politics, and I wanted to keep talking to him. He's got a lot of interesting thoughts on religion, politics, economics, you name it. And one of the things he posted on Instagram the other day was about the price of groceries and inflation, et cetera. And I immediately messaged him and I said, we need to talk about this on a podcast because, as you guys know, one of the things I talk about a lot on this podcast is how economics drives incentives. So if you can print money, if you can get something for free and you don't have to work for it, most people are going to take that deal. And I think that drives the war machine as well. But with that being said, Adam, thanks for coming back on.
Well, no, thanks for bringing me back on. Always a pleasure to have a conversation. So,
yeah, brother. So one of my, what did you think about what I just said? I think, so, before we started recording, we were talking about Afghanistan, and how a lot of veterans are dealing with, veterans of Afghanistan are dealing with that withdrawal. And it's not that we did withdraw and that it was such a mess. Obviously, that affected people. To me, it's that what I thought the entire time while we were over there, it was a waste of time, human capital, energy, etc., and taxpayer capital of why we were over in Afghanistan. That's what I thought, because I've been over there twice, and it's all true, right? So it was that realization that, like, maybe, because I always question myself, like, maybe I'm an idiot, maybe there's something deeper here, like why we're over here. But I think the reason the United States, especially the taxpayer, kind of went along with that. By went along, I mean a lot of people I know didn't even know we were still over in Afghanistan. They don't know we're in Iraq right now. They don't know we're in Syria right now. We're in these places. But the reason they don't care, and I'll say air quotes because some of them probably do, is because they're not taxed for it. It doesn't say on their W-2 negative $500 for the Afghanistan war in 2005 or 2006 and go so on and so forth. The way we pay for it is deficit spending. So it allows for this war machine to kind of sneak beneath the surface, because to me, the accountability is the taxpayer. That's how the money system works. And if you don't need the taxpayer to fund the war machine, incentives are really going to get out of whack. And I've seen that the last couple of years. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think the American people and whoever listens to this podcast need to understand something very directly. The United States does not get involved in any conflict unless it directly benefits it economically, strategically, or in terms of trade and anything else. If we were really fighting for freedom and democracy of other countries, then why weren't we in Rwanda during the Rwandan genocide? Right? Well, Rwanda didn't provide us any economic benefits, so we let millions of people just die. Right. And that goes for any conflict. Right. It even took the United States getting bombed in Pearl Harbor and directly affecting our trade routes and our manufacturing abilities in World War II for us to get involved in World War II. Like, I don't think most people even know that. We did not get involved in World War II until several years after the fact. Right. That was going on since 1939. And we didn't get involved until 1941. Right. So Afghanistan is also a perfect example of that. And this is probably going to be dove into much later, probably 20, 30 years from now. But why did we stay in Afghanistan for so long? Now, I also give this to the political illiterate in the United States, is that anytime the words democracy, freedom, screaming bald eagle, American flag pants, and tank tops marketing get put out there, they believe America's awesome and this is what we're going to do. We're going to go fight for democracy. And this actually ties directly into the opioid crisis into the 2000s, even until now. Well, if anyone knows anything about Afghanistan, even on a baseline, they could just Google this now. Who is the number one producer of opioids in the world? Well, it's Afghanistan. So we already secured the energy corridor in the Persian Gulf in the early 90s with the first Gulf War, right? We didn't go to Iraq to free the Kuwaitis. We just know that Kuwait is a warm water port where outside of Basra, they have all the main shipping lanes from Saudi Arabia and everything else. And since we weren't into the massive hydraulic fracturing things until really the 2010s, 2012 timeframe, even when I entered the oil field, the only way to secure cheap energy in that area and stabilize our trading partners was to ensure energy security in the region. And we've been there ever since, right? We invented fracking. The English also did the same thing. Halliburton gave drilling technology to the Saudis in the late 30s, early 40s. And it's been that way ever since, right? We started developing these technologies overseas. We perfected it. We let them suffer from all the bad stuff of explosions and bad things happening because we'd rather have it somewhere else versus our country. But now we have an established energy pipeline over there. And in Afghanistan, I've even talked to many personal friends who, they go over to Afghanistan and all of a sudden they're getting attached to the DEA. And it's like, well, why is the DEA with us? And then they're rolling to the opium fields and securing crops or, burning them down or securing those assets and sending them elsewhere. And all those pharmaceutical companies, all through the 2000s, even to now, had the largest boom of opioid produced drugs in the world. And it killed tens of thousands of millions of people around the world as a result of that. Right. But it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry in pharmaceuticals. Right. The only people that make more money other than that is the military industrial complex. We look at why are we getting, we're not directly involved in Ukraine in terms of American troops openly anyway. But why is Ukraine important to the United States and not any of these other civil wars going on in Sudan or in Africa? Well, there's one very simple reason to that. Ukraine provides 80% of the grain to the Middle East because the Middle East cannot grow food. So in order to maintain stability food-wise, because the only thing you need to do to start a civil war is reduce food, power, and energy access, right, is to ensure that our partner forces in the Middle East, even if we don't get along openly, still can make bread and feed their kids. Well, the port where they also get sent to, all the grain, is the port of Tartus in Syria. So people always ask, why are we in Syria? Well, the Russians also know this, and they secure pretty much the entire northeastern side of Syria. They control the port there. And in order to control the grain supply coming from Ukraine, which is another reason why Russia invaded Ukraine, people's like, oh, it's because Putin's a jerk. It's like, no, he just saw an open opportunity knowing that the American military was not going to respond directly. And he took an inch and tried to grab a mile out of it. Because if Putin controls the grain and the oil and gas energy supply coming out of Ukraine, he can rewrite the narrative of the partnerships of Western forces in the Middle East and in Europe in general. So that's why we get involved in these different types of conflicts. And I just think Americans need to just do a little bit more research to understand that the United States military will not get involved in anything unless it directly affects us, benefits us and our trading partners, and creating our stability that we require to run our own economy through the access to food, power, and energy.
I agree with what you're saying, but I have a couple of pushbacks on that.
Sure.
The United States, when you say we won't get involved, because Afghanistan, for instance, let's take that one. If the narrative is we are trying to control the poppy field so we can control the opium, meaning the United States, that actually doesn't help the United States. It hurts the United States to have, let's just say it benefits the drug companies. Okay, great. But if you have people dying and addicted to opioids, then that doesn't help your population. So like there's a narrative that people agree with you, but it's not the United States, it's the 1%. It's the people who pull the levers of power and go, hey, this will benefit my stock holdings in X. So let's go to war here. It doesn't benefit the United States. It's not like these are statesmen who are like, hey, this is a hard decision. So, but in the long run, it benefits, it helps feed my people or whatever. They don't look at it that way. They look at it, this line's in my pocket. And if I have to carpet bomb my own citizens to do it, I don't care. What do you think about that?
So that's actually a really good point. But I think this is also a perfect example of how American politicians or people who write these policies and who lobby for these ideas, like, don't think of the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth order of effects of making those decisions. I still believe that they get involved in these things in order to maintain control of the drug markets or maintain control of the trade routes. But what they don't anticipate, which is actually even explained in that most recent Netflix mockumentary about the opioid crisis, is that, oh, the pharmaceutical companies will come into my office and say that we can provide 10 milligrams of, of this drug, and it can help resolve all of these issues and ailments for all these people in the United States experiencing this pain. What they didn't anticipate was doctors to start writing non-stop prescriptions, because that wasn't explained to the congressman in that state when they approved all these trade things. And I think it's like, these are the effects that are not thought about, because Americans do have a lot of free will when it comes to, open free market ideas, right? Or it wasn't anticipated like, oh, when we develop the F-35, it's going to be the most cost-effective jet ever developed, because we're going to have this giant synergy of parts, and it's all going to be common inner plug-and-play components, and there's going to be multiple countries, so everything's going to be fine. Well, what they didn't anticipate was different types of materials being used, and the entire supply chain getting clogged up, and it not being interchangeable. Same thing happened with the LHS ships, those new naval ships that were being created for littoral combat. Oh, this was going to be the new brown water Navy that can fight in littoral combat zones. But what they didn't know was that I think it was Ingersoll Rand and Lockheed Martin, they both had the same contract to develop the same type of warship, but they were each using different components because they were proprietary, because they were trying to keep those jobs in those states. And as a result, they were completely interchangeable. The engines didn't even work. And we scrapped all of those ships in less than 10 years and cost the taxpayers billions of dollars for an ineffective combat system. It just did not work, right? So I think the biggest problem is that you get this PowerPoint proposal put into these congressional offices. It sounds really good on paper because you think you have all these people doing the research to present these ideas before they do it. You could show how much it benefits the state and how much taxes they're going to make and how much jobs it's going to provide, and they sign off on it. But they don't think about the third, fourth, and fifth order of effects of those actions occurring. And I believe the same thing happened in Afghanistan as well, because even though, yes, securing opioid production was a priority, but then they say, yeah, but then CAT can go over there and bring all their excavators and bulldozers over there too. We can sell more machinery over there, because then we can change their farming industry with John Deere, and then we can make them more Americanized so they can plant even more and produce even more. Well, they didn't anticipate them stealing all that equipment, blowing it up, selling it to their brother, then attacking Americans with it, and then they have to bring over more multi-million-dollar, construction and farming equipment, which is still just sitting out there rusting, because what they didn't anticipate was that the Afghanis aren't really good at developing a preventative maintenance program and having a John Deere factory out there that they can go to bring their tractor to get the oil changed. And they didn't think about that. If we give them 100,000 tractors, they're going to be able to farm more and have jobs. Well, they don't understand that the industrial base required to maintain that equipment over 20, 30, 40, 50 years is also necessary. And that was not thought about extensively. And as a result, now we have billions of dollars of brand new equipment sitting there dry rotting in the desert because they can't do oil changes. They can't just go to John Deere store and, buy the parts they need to fix their tractor. So they just go back to using that old stuff that's been there from like the Russian invasion from like the 60s and 70s. And because it still runs and they don't need all the parts. Right. So just to make a long story short, they don't think about the after effects of what is required in order to maintain those policy initiatives. And it just costs the American taxpayer billions of dollars because they realize, well, that didn't work. So let's throw some more money out of it and just try something else. Right.
But how are they this is why I focus on fixing the money, because I think it's the fact that we can make these mistakes. No one gets punished for them. And these mistakes can go on for 20 years, because you can, make some excuses like, okay, I can see why you would think like we're going to try to industrialize Afghanistan so they're not terrorists anymore. But then if that perpetuates for 20 years and there's no movement in that, in that culture, then you got to think, okay, someone's getting rich off this.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they're throwing money away, it's taxpayer money. The benefit is in stock price of John Deere or whatever, or Lockheed Martin. And what's to prevent them from doing this again? And I think they're doing it again in Ukraine, because if we're talking about resources, like Ukraine's an interesting one to me, because it all makes sense if you go to war for resources. That's pretty much what war's been about forever. Religion and resources, right? But Ukraine, the way, like any status or strategic planner, and I think it was Patton that said, "War's logistics." Like, it's not like how many men you have; it's logistics. Because if you're fighting a war, not just a battle, it's about logistics. And the first thing that happened is Russia cut off oil to NATO in Germany, and you're like, okay, so NATO was put up there to fight the USSR, okay, and now Germany is reliant on oil from Russia. That doesn't make any sense. And then we cut off Russia from the dollar system. So I'm like, none of this makes sense. And Ukraine, there's no way in hell. Ukraine, well, if you're have any military mind, will ever beat Russia in anything when it comes to the military, unless NATO boots are on the ground. Okay. So I knew that from day one, and I'm a dum-dum. Okay. Anybody knows that from day one. Yet we're throwing money, right? We're throwing equipment and money at Ukraine. Why? Because, and then Europe is starting to realize, we're dependent on Russia for oil and oil prices, and their inflation's jacking way up. And so it seems to me that this is less of a geopolitical game, like what benefits my country, because we've made a lot of mistakes that don't benefit our country. The green energy movement, all this stupidity that we keep doing. It's like, that doesn't benefit the people of the United States. That benefits very few people. And the way they're able to do that, the mechanism, is the money. They don't have to tax you to get what they want. They'll just pass another budget that involves deficit spending, and who cares if you pay taxes or not? Because we'll get the money anyways, because we'll print it or go into debt for it.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the United States, at least, especially in members of Congress, for the past several decades, have a sunk cost fallacy, right? We could just keep throwing money at things because no one's telling us to stop and do it. There's zero accountability. And that is the major issue in our country now, and why we're seeing such massive rates of inflation in the housing market and car prices and the price of groceries, is because, well, no one's stopping us. So we're just going to keep doing it because no one's stopping us from doing it. And it really is going to take the American people to realize and stand up, which, and this is that discussion we had before the podcast. Like, what's it going to take for Americans to actually produce a civil war and that institute radical change in the United States? Well, in the current state of things, it's never going to happen, because everyone can plug in their cell phone. At the end of the day, you could still go to the grocery store. You might spend a little bit more money, but you're going to get your food, and for most people in the United States, they can just go turn on the faucet and they have clean water, right? And until those base Maslow hierarchy of needs resources get pulled from Americans, they're not going to stop their politicians from doing anything, because at the end of the day, if they're sick of hearing about it, they just turn their TV off, right? And they go to sleep and they hang out with their kids or their wives, or they go drink a few beers with their neighbors and do the Hank Hill standing by the fence, just bitching at the lawnmower in the driveway type of thing, right? It's Americans are very geopolitically illiterate in general. Until you spend time in a third world country, you don't really understand what actually matters in running a country. Like, I spent time with Paul last month, and you understand these people literally every day are fighting for food, electricity, and clean water. And because they don't have stability in those things, they don't fight or worry about anything else going on. They don't care what's going on 5 miles down the road, because today we have to filter enough water so we can cook, shower, and drink water today, right? But because we're so spoiled with the amount of abundant resources we have in this country, it blinds Americans to what really matters. And that's why there's so much free spending of money, and there's no accountability within our own elected members of our government, is because Americans do not hold those people accountable, because they believe they can't do anything about it. And they can, but they have to be willing to want to be political intellectuals and read up on the issues, and have town halls and have dispersed conversations around their communities about these things and how they can institute change, or boycotts or anything like that. I mean, people had no problem doing an entire boycott against Bud Light and dropping that company several $1 billion over, an interpretation of transgenderism and whatever else in this country. They had no problem doing it to Bud Light. So Americans can do it, and they have done it, but it's always hot button topic issues that last about, a couple days, a couple weeks, and then, okay, we have what we want back, and our outrage on social media is over, so we're going to go back to doing what we've always done. And it's such a distraction from what's going on in our government. Like, even yesterday, they passed a bill that is even going to be more invasive to allowing surveillance of Americans' electronic devices and any asset. Now, literally by what the law was passed, the US government now can have access to even the hotel routers from the hotel rooms that you rent out in order to access your cell phone because you're freely using it, because it's for the safety and security of the surveillance state. And Americans allowed that to get passed without a blink of an eye. You know, and people are like, do you guys not remember the Patriot Act? Do you guys not remember this stuff? Well, that was 20 years ago. So now we can keep passing these bills and taking away more and more individual freedoms and constitutional rights because they're just going to keep giving us money and taxing us anyway. And if you don't like it, the IRS is going to send you a bill regardless, right? And I think Americans just become so oblivious to where their money's going. They just don't care because they're so overwhelmed with consumerism and what the new latest iPhone is or what the new latest outrages on social media is, that they don't understand the basics of what is important in society, right? And that allows them to keep running this war machine and continually spending money on things that we're never going to see a return on because it's not affecting their daily lives enough that they care, right?
Yeah, those two base motivations that kind of drive people's actions, greed and fear. I think we're still in greed. We can still, I do see the tides turning because people are realizing, hey, wait a second, I'm living a worse life. If you're on social media, you see these millennials like, I can't afford a house, I can't afford this, and this, and I'm like making way more money than my parents ever did at my age. What's going on? And this is why I'm a big believer, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I'm a big believer in fixing the money because if you're a student of history, the way this is happening today, it's all about incentives. So you're not going to get mad. The analogy I use is if you are in a classroom and the teacher walks out during the test and says, "Don't look at your book," and you're the honest kid in the class, and you see everyone else look at their book, and you get a B, and everyone else gets an A, and then you let the teacher know. You say, "Hey, they cheated," and he's like, "I don't care." You're going to start to realize that you're the dummy. You're stupid because everybody else is cheating to get ahead. And that's the system. Like, so if you're a politician and you want to go to Congress and balance the budget, what does that actually mean? What that actually means is cutting Social Security massively, cutting Medicare massively, reforming it massively. And do your citizens actually want that? Probably not, because they don't understand, like 20 years down the road, what our kids are going to have to deal with. And this is why in history, every single country who had fiat currency, meaning government, it's just currency because we say so. They've devalued it. And then the resource, like you were talking about with war, it eventually leads to a resource problem because your wages never keep up with inflation. And even if you have access to it, you can't afford it. So you'll steal it. Or you'll use violence to get it because you can't afford it. And therefore you get more dependent on the government, and the government makes the problem worse. So this is why I think I'm a huge fan of Bitcoin. Like, that's been the one thing that I'm kind of focused on the last couple of years because I see the problem. There's a lot of people who can prescribe the problem, right? Overspending, what it leads to, etc. And I'm like, that's kind of a exercise in futility if you don't have a solution. Because if the system fails, guess what? They're coming out with the same system all over again. It just restarts. It's government declared currency, and they revalue everything into the new CBDC or whatever they decide. So what are your thoughts on that? One, Bitcoin, and then two, like the actual base layer of the system, the money has to be fixed, and it can't be a government fix because they're just going to come out with the same thing.
Exactly. And that's like the big argument that people try to make against cryptocurrency, even with Sam Bankman, when he did the whole, FTX like catastrophe. But well, there's no real actual assets that this stuff is based on, and it all just doesn't exist, and it's just a bunch of numbers. I'm like, yeah, what do you think your current system of money is in the United States? It's not backed by anything. It's just we tell you it's worth something because that's what it is. And in a way, cryptocurrency is very similar, but if people understand how cryptocurrency ledgers and different controls that's from a non-centralized area, then yes, it actually makes more sense in terms of value than even the current American currency system, right? And it's also one of the reasons why Putin and all these other leaders are trying to push for a currency that's actually based upon physical assets, whether that's gold or oil or everything else, because even they recognize that there needs to be value attached to currency because inflation is devaluing all these currencies or fiat currencies to the point where there is going to be some type of collapse of the system at some point in time. Do I know when that time is? No, but it has to happen. Right? It just absolutely has to. So cryptocurrency is definitely a good way to eliminate those risks of that happening from the government. But then you look at all of this legislation that's being proposed for the government to try to be able to control cryptocurrencies, because even they know that, well, if the people really start learning how to use cryptocurrencies and everything else, then that's not going to benefit our system. So we need to make sure that we can control that system. In Africa and all these other countries, the only way that those countries can even trade or pay things between each other is with cryptocurrency, especially in a lot of these third world countries, because they don't have a central banking system because it's so corrupt it can't exist, right? So you like all these like Sudanese farmers, or even like in Nepal, all these small-time farmers, they trade with Bitcoin. They pay each other with different cryptocurrencies because the government doesn't control the currency. So it's actually worth something to them. The people make it worth something to themselves, and it works. But then you look at like countries like India, where they're now trying to come in and get rid of these apps. They're banning these apps. They're preventing these people from using it because then it takes away control of the government, of the people in those areas, right? And that's a great turning point for what's going on in America now, is that some Americans realize that that is going to happen. But that's why they try to keep the systems set the way they are. And you are 100% correct. There are so many entitlement forms that need to be done. People always like, oh, we spend, whatever, $898 billion a year on defense. Like, we need to cut military spending. Okay, yes, I can see there's a lot of fraud. Anyone who serves in the military knows the levels of fraud, waste, and abuse in any aspect. They're like, but do you know how much Social Security costs and how much Medicare and Medicaid costs this country? Way more than the U.S. military. I think
how much it's going to continue, like it's going up too, significantly.
I think I haven't looked at the pie chart recently, but it's like it's over like 40 to 50% of our budget is spent on entitlement programs, and only like about 10 to 20% is spent on the U.S. military, right? But people want to go after
that. We don't vote on that.
Correct. But people want to go after the military spending, or they want to go after XYZ, but they don't understand like entitlements need to be reformed in the United States. If it was my personal, opinion, it's how about you stop federally taxing me for all that crap? Let me keep it. Let me run it into my own 401k with my own company, because I'll get a better return on it than I ever will from the U.S. government. But there's this post-World War II society and the boomer generation, and everything else, because that's what they were promised and that's what they were told. And this is what the government's going to guarantee me. And don't take away my, $300 a month check from the U.S. government. Like my grandma feels the same way. She's 99 years old. She's like, well, I couldn't survive without Social Security. And if they take that away, then they're killing grandma. And I sat there and went, okay, well, you grew up like in a post-World War II environment where you were 100% dependent on the government jobs to even sustain the economy in that area. And that just doesn't exist anymore. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I think they should. I don't think they should just say, okay, old people who are living on it now, they should wean it off for sure. We're not going to get it. But like the Obama a couple years ago, like this is always the political line. They want to kill grandma. They want to cut off. Okay. And then they say they want to steal your money. Okay. If it's my money, I don't want to pay into it. Right. Because what people don't realize is it's a transfer payment, and there's not enough people to pay into the system who are taking out yada, yada, yada. It all makes sense. But some people, it's just a political football that you cannot touch in this country until the pain is so bad that people will go, well, I'm getting Social Security and I got a pay raise this year, but it keeps buying me less and less eggs, or it pays less and less rent, or whatever it is. Like the government won't be able to afford it. And as baby boomers retire, what is it, $250 trillion in unfunded liabilities? Yeah. But I wanted to touch on going back to crypto. Specifically, I like Bitcoin because of what you said. It is censorship resistant. So there's a guy, I'll send you a video after this, and I encourage you guys, I can put it in the description. He works for Space Force. He did a military-sponsored study at MIT on Bitcoin and the power of it being a potential military asset. And he likens it to gunpowder. And he does it in a much more eloquent way. And you being an energy guy would probably get a lot out of it. His name's Jason Lowery. And he talks about it like gunpowder. Like you can say, hey, we don't want to, because gunpowder used to be used as medicine. And then they realized it was explosive. Okay, cool. So your country wants to outlaw it. What does that do to your country? It means your country is going to be taken over, right? So if you decide we don't want our people using X, Y, and Z, it actually only hurts you in the long run. And that's when when it's discovered, and I feel like kind of Bitcoin is discovery, like, or the blockchain itself, and being able to have digital scarcity, which is what it is, and it's distributed and no one controls it, etc. All the other ones, you call the CEO and they can shut it down. There's a point of leverage for the government with all these other cryptocurrencies. There's a CEO somewhere. You look at Binance, they just sued the crap out of him.
Yep.
You can't. It's like shutting down the internet. Where is the internet?
Right.
You don't know, right? It's everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and that's why, like, I'm a big believer in incentives in the positive and the negative. So unless you change those incentives, and then people always go to the better money. Like in Argentina, there's no government decree that says you have to use dollars, but as soon as people get paid, they transfer their money into dollars because it holds value better than the Argentinian peso. And no one's telling them to do that. They just do it. And that's what humans do. Like, if your currency sucks, you try a different one. And you try whatever's better. And I think separating money from government is going to be one of the most powerful freedom movements in the world ever. And we've never been able to do that. We tried it with gold, but it required centralization with the printer, and then we got off gold and all that kind of stuff. So what are your thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree. I just don't know how that's ever going to happen, because the government's only maintain control over their people because they control the money, right? And as long as they can control the money, they can dictate what services are going to be provided, how the country's going to run, where the infrastructure is going to go, what the military is going to be funded with, what their entitlement programs are going to be funded with. And I think that's why there's such an effort by not only the United States government, but many other countries' governments in the Western world, especially. Actually, well, even in the third world too, because like I said, even India and Nepal and a lot of these other countries are trying to limit the access and availability of cryptocurrency by just like controlling what apps you can download on your phone.
Of course,
right? Because they know that takes power away from the government, and it gives more power to the people because they can run their own commerce and trade within themselves, within their own smart devices and everything else. And that's,
but then you have economic flight. Like, so if you want to, unlike, this is why governments love real estate, and there's tax benefits to real estate because you can't move it. Right. So there's they have you trapped to a certain degree. Like, if they want to raise your property taxes, you can't go, fine, I'm leaving your country and I'm going somewhere else. You have to leave your property. But if you want to, and then there's brain drain too. If you want to be overly onerous as a country, and then there's another country who wants freedom and they want Bitcoin, because there's always going to be competition, people will leave, and then you'll have this competitive drive. Like, they want more money. Politicians want more money, power, and control. And how do they get more money, power, and control if all the producers in their country are leaving to be able to produce somewhere else where they can actually benefit from their labor? That's what I think the game theory of this is. Like, I don't think governments are just going to be like, okay, fine, new currency, fine. But I don't think the if you play it out, how the incentives are going to play out, they're shooting themselves in the foot by doing that, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, I completely agree. I think it is a reactionary detail of these politicians, right? It's like, oh, something's changing. We need to try to figure out how to control it right now to try to keep the status quo. And once again, it's like the discussion we had at the beginning of the podcast. They're not thinking about the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth order of effects of doing that. They're just thinking about the right now and what is going to be the instantaneous effect of blocking access to Bitcoin or maintaining a fiat currency in the US dollar. And by the way, we're going to keep trading oil in the US dollar, because that actually is what kind of gives our money a little bit of value, is that it still trades technically. It's not the gold standard, it's just the oil standard. But then you have to worry about, even what I saw when I was over there, is that there is some serious consideration to move it like to the Chinese yuan or some other currency. And as soon as they do that, the US dollar would collapse, because there's nothing that's physically backing it, which is why there's that massive movement amongst the BRICS countries, with Russia, India, China, Singapore, and Russia and Brazil, is because they see that and they understand, well, the only way that we can be competitive against cryptocurrency is to provide a physical natural resource asset that backs that currency. And that's why they were pushing so hard to develop that type of currency. Now, whether those countries can actually agree upon that, that's going to be interesting to see if that actually happens. But if they were able to develop a currency that is backed on resources that humans need, whether that's gold, water, oil, timber, coal, things like that, that might definitely change the game in terms of like getting rid of fiat currencies. Because even like, the Russian ruble is like it has to be based on petro trading. It can't be based upon anything else. But it's like this constant fight now between all these governments of how can we maintain control of our fiat currency to maintain its value in order to gain the influence and power that we want wherever they are throughout the world.
Yeah. But one of the things, like, I've looked into the BRICS. I don't think anybody, like, at the end of the day, currency is trust. So even if you say, oh, this is backed by natural resources, okay, who audits that? Right? Oh, Xi Jinping audits it. Oh, he does? Like, no one trusts China. Like, when it comes to economic freedom, no one trusts China. And if we're looking at capital flows, even in China, you cannot leave the country with your money. That's why luxuries like Louis Vuitton and real estate are so massive there, because you can't leave the country with your money. And I think I see what they're doing. I don't think anybody's going to trust the BRICS countries with a currency for like 100 years, unless it's like proven that, okay, they're actually backing it somehow. But that requires, just like when we had the gold standard here. Are you sure you're not printing more dollars than you have gold? And then France came over and like, actually, we want our gold back. And Nixon's like, psych, you can't have it. So then we went off the gold standard. So any fiat currency or any currency from a government that is backed by anything requires trust, because you can't audit it. And
I completely agree. And that's why I don't think their BRICS countries are going to be able to successfully. It sounds like a good idea. In theory, it sounds good. Yeah. Oh, this currency is actually backed by something. Hooray. But implementing that and having, open discussions about the control of are these going to be stockpiled in Antarctica and a neutral continent that everyone has access to, right? No, absolutely not. And that's why ultimately the move to cryptocurrency in the future would be a better way of controlling assets and money and trade, because it is decentralized and is not controlled by any one entity by design.
Yeah. And it's neutral is key. Like, when you're playing the game of Monopoly, if one person has different rules than you, which, by the way, that's the United States today. The rule is we can print energy, because if oil is priced in dollars, then everyone else has to work for those dollars, and we can print them. Mm-hmm. But if the rules are different for you, and there's no mutual benefit for those rules changing, people are going to start to get pissed off. And when the United States, when Russia invaded Ukraine, said, hey, those treasuries you have that are in United States dollars, those aren't yours anymore. That is, I think, just like 1971 when we went off the gold standard, that will be in history a turning point where a lot of these countries go, okay, the dollar isn't neutral anymore. So if we're going to use it as a world reserve currency, and the United States is going to play politics like, hey, you didn't invest in transgender butterfly research in your country, so we're going to have to cut you off from the dollar-based system. These countries' incentives matter, so they're going to look for something else. And the only neutral one, in my humble opinion, that works in the geopolitical world we live in, with the internet, et cetera, and fast-moving transit or transactions, is Bitcoin.
I would agree, and I think that the biggest problem to that, the roadblock, is going to be government policies preventing the use of cryptocurrencies in actual commerce and trade within its borders. And that's what you're seeing, a lot of that resistance now. And it's just, can the citizens of the world figure out how to overcome that? Because now, if the IRS, everyone else is tracking all of your cryptocurrency movements, because I think the biggest problem they have with it now is that people are still having to turn it into physical currency to do any actual trade. Like, I can't, I currently cannot go to the grocery store and buy things in Bitcoin off my phone. And there's some areas where you can do something like that, but like, for the most part, no, I still have to turn it into American dollars, and I still have to use American currency for my Bitcoin to be worth something in the physical world in order to get goods and services. Right. And I think that's that's the biggest hurdle that crypto is experiencing, where a lot of people are like, oh, crypto's stupid, and everyone's just like wasting their time and money. And it's like, well, I mean, yes, but no, right? Because obviously it's the future of where currency is going to go. Like, I don't see currency globally going anywhere else in 100 years other than some type of digital decentralized platform. It has to go that way. Like it can't keep, we can't keep using like the US dollar or the Chinese yuan or the Russian ruble as a way of stabilizing international trade, especially since we're such an interconnected world at this point. And it also makes like trading currencies between other countries and borders so much easier because you're not doing all these conversion factors and I get 20,000 Nepali dollars for 5 American dollars. No, it's one neutral coexistent platform internationally. And there's no people who don't see that changing in the next, at least in our lifetime, at least in the next 20 years, like you're just blind to change.
Yeah. And I think they're going to work in parallel for a while. There are companies like, I think it's Stripe, that if you have a Bitcoin wallet, you can swipe your card and immediately transfers it from Bitcoin to dollars. So you use the Bitcoin rails to send the money, and then it converts it into dollars. So I think technology is going to is going to get better, and that's going to have more mass adoption. But even if I'm wrong about Bitcoin, I am right about money. Like, the money is the problem. Like,
agreed.
And I always encourage people to read up on it, because Bitcoin's the best answer I've found. Okay, it's not to say that it can't fail, right? But it's the best answer I've found. And if you're trying to solve the problem, which is, in my opinion, the money printer and the no accountability, because if your government wants to do something stupid like send billions of dollars in tractors to Afghanistan, there's accountability to the taxpayer, because they have to come back to you and say, hey, can you buy more war bonds so we can go dry rot these things out in the desert? And you're going to go, absolutely not. Right. But the way they do it now is deficit spending and then taking your purchasing power through inflation. And it's happened slow enough that it's the boiling frog syndrome. And now the water's turned up the last couple of years, and there's no leeway for the government. Like, the government used to be able to, in the theory for Keynesian economics, is that boom times you save, and then government spending incentivizes, like kind of stimulates the economy from a savings account, not from a deficit, right? But now we're running wartime deficits in a time where things are really good. So what happens when we have a recession? Those deficits go up.
Yep.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see, but I do think everything comes back to money.
Well, and although there is like Bitcoin mining and stuff like that, I mean, the one benefit of moving to a system like that is that they can't just start printing more Bitcoin because they need to get more Bitcoin to send more tractors to Afghanistan to dry rot. Like, there's accountability on the ledgers, and like they would be unable to do that. It would be impossible, right? And that's one of the biggest reasons, in my opinion, that the U.S. government doesn't want to switch to a system like that, because there'd be actual financial accountability to spending and transferring funds in and out of whatever. They can't just, well, we're out. Well, let's just make some more because we can, because we said so.
Yeah. And it pissed me off a couple of years ago. Like, I started thinking about this. Like, everything comes back to energy, right? You spend your energy and your time to trade that for a currency, but you don't care what the currency is. You care what it buys you, right?
Right.
And you see a lot of things online, like people bitching and moaning about capitalism. And I ask, the simple question, like, if you haven't even thought about this, but I'm like, if you think about capitalism, the way, let's say Adam and I have two competing companies who could produce the same thing. The way we compete is through productivity. You have quality, you have customer service to some degree, but ultimately it's price. And what that's going to do is drive the marginal cost of the product we timeout. Looks like we lost Adam here. Oh, there you are.
That was, I get randomly just went off. I have no idea what the hell happened.
No problem.
What's up?
Well, what I was saying
today.
The government's watching us. But like, if we're in a capitalist country, wouldn't that mean that prices keep going down? Because
you would
that's how you compete. So why do they keep going up on things like housing, medical care, education, everything you need, to a certain degree, food too, as a percentage of your income, keep going up? If we're a capitalist country, why do they keep going up?
I mean, that's a good question. In my opinion, it's just because we keep spending the money that we don't have, and there's no other result in order to raise the price of everything around it, because we need to get more taxes in order to keep funding this insatiable need to keep spending money. And there's no control on it. Like it's just a free for all. Like, and also we're not seeing any detrimental effects yet that are personally affecting people enough to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we need to take a time out on this stuff. Like, people have, it's not like 2008 yet, where like people legitimately lost their fucking houses. Right. We're not at that point yet. Now, part of me, because I love chaos, right? Because chaos will induce change. But like, it needs to happen. It needs to happen. Like, there needs to be some kind of system collapse that actually goes, oh crap, what we've been doing isn't working. We really need to make drastic change. But unfortunately, the reactionary, decision making by our politicians is, well, time for a bailout. Let's throw more money at it. Like, there's literally an entire South Park episode called Margaritaville, where the U.S. government just chops the head off a chicken and it runs around a board, and whatever it lands on, that's the government solution, right? And that's literally, it appears that's how our government runs. Bailout or this or that. There's no actual consideration of how to actually prevent this from happening in the future. It's just instant reactionary spending on everything. That's broken, throw more money at it. Oh, Ukraine's on fire, throw more money at it. Oh, the Middle East is on fire, throw more money at it. Well, we're just throwing money into a furnace because it's not solving anything, but it just makes people feel comfortable for 5 minutes and get distracted until the next thing occurs. But until people start physically losing their stuff and things like they start losing their jobs or anything else like that, like, they're just going to keep allowing it. Right. And that's what we're seeing now is, inflation rates are high. And I'm going to the grocery store spending $200 on, I made a video about it, like even last week. Oh, it drove me nuts. Like, I went to the grocery store just to get some basic stuff. Like, and I don't go to the grocery store a lot because I live in the middle of nowhere. And it was like literally like cottage cheese, eggs, butter, like, it's the typical shit I always eat. And I'm like, how did I just spend $137 on this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And I have a decent job and I'm very blessed and I'm very lucky. But I go, how the hell do people like afford this stuff? Well, they rack it up on their credit cards and they just like, well, I'll just put it on my credit card because I'll pay it off like eventually. And then I turn around and there's literally like a government incentivized program where they're handing out cell phones and iPads to people on Medicare and Medicaid and who are homeless for free. And I'm like, wait a minute, for free? And then they literally take it and then they walk down the street and go to the pawn shop and then sell it to go back and buy other stuff that they don't need in this consumerism society. Like, they're not using it to like benefit themselves. Like, or like the tagline AOC tried to use like a couple weeks ago was like, these people are only robbing stores in order to feed their families and get bread. And it's like, no, that guy's running through a store stealing all the Nike shoes and shirts because it's a consumerism society and that they know that's what's going to make the money. And also, nobody is stopping them. Like, nobody is stopped. No one's getting shot over this stuff relatively. You know what I mean? Like, it's pure, it's almost pure chaos now where it's like, no one cares. Like, nobody cares. They're just like, oh, yeah, it's whatever. It doesn't affect me. So who cares? We're going to watch the store get ransacked. We're going to watch it get robbed. We're just going to give out tens of thousands of dollars of electronics to people who don't even have a job. And all these other idiots over here, they're just going to put all their groceries on their credit card and, whatever. Everyone still has their stuff. Even if they're just pushing things around on the credit card and pushing things around on the money that doesn't exist, everyone still has their stuff and they still have a place to sleep for the most part. So who cares? Right. And it's just, I don't know what the breaking point is going to be. I don't know at what point people are going to be like, oh, I actually don't have anything anymore. I don't have a way to fund this lifestyle because the government's not incentivizing it now. But it's just like, that was wild to me. Like, literally watch a government program sit there and hand out tens of thousands of dollars of electronics to people that don't even have a job. And everyone else is spending like over $100 on the basic stuff that every American uses every day. Like, it's wild. It makes no sense. And it just keeps going.
It comes back to like that analogy I used with the school. Like, if you're cheating your way through school and you're getting A's, Okay, great. That's great for you, right? But the real problem is if you're studying biology to be a doctor, you don't know how to be a doctor. And now you have the credentials and not the understanding. And when it comes to the economy, that same thing happens. Like I use the analogy of let's say there's two competing companies. Let's call them airlines. And one airline has a really tight budget. They don't overspend. They have savings for a rainy day. And the other airline spends every dollar that comes in expanding. When bad stuff happens, like COVID, the airline that was saving money will be able to buy out the one that went bankrupt because they weren't planning. But what actually happens is the government comes and bails them both out. And so the person who's the sucker is the airline who is actually operating correctly. And you, as a taxpayer, becomes a sucker because eventually they run out of other people's money. We've all heard this before, but you stop. You're like, dude, I just spent $700 on Christmas gifts, and this dude just walked out with $900 of Xbox supplies for his kid for free. He just walked out. Doesn't mean I want to steal, but you're just like, am I the idiot here? What's happening? Because a society that incentivizes bad behavior, guess what, is going to get it. And I think the turning point, like if I can make a prediction, like we have all-time high credit card debt, we have all-time high government debt. If we have a recession, and then we have all-time high housing prices, all this stuff at higher interest rates, when the recession comes, and there's all kinds of indicators that it is, if people lose jobs, the government comes in and says, you know what we need? Why haven't we thought about this? Why don't we just give people their salary? We'll call it UBI, which will there's no incentive for them not to do it, and it just makes all the problems worse. And to be honest, I think the American voter, the majority of them, don't care. Just like during COVID, they're like, oh, cool, shut down my business. You're going to pay me, right? Okay, you can pay me. And like, wait, you didn't think that there was going to be consequences to that? Like, why don't we all just stay home and never work and the government pays us? And people, if they go through that thought experiment, they're like, oh, that doesn't make sense because there's no stuff to buy. Oh yeah, there's no stuff to buy.
But like, and that's the problem, is that they kept funding it, throwing money at people so they can keep their consumerist, materialistic lifestyles up. And because they still have their stuff, then there's no incentive for them to want to change anything. And they're like, oh, this is great. I can even do less and still keep all my stuff. So we should keep doing that, you know, and it's like, no, that's why I said, like, people need to start losing stuff. You know, people need to start having their bank accounts wiped out by the federal government because the FDIC actually can't back it because there's nothing there. You know,
will they let them lose? That's my point. Like, they will lose their stuff, guaranteed. Will the government let them lose their stuff?
No. Because then they lose their power. Then they're actually going to get thrown out of office. Then there actually would be some type of, like I said, that would be the preconditions of a Civil War type environment, is when people lose their stuff that they actually need, whether it's housing and food and access to all their things, that's when things are going to happen, right? But you know, you don't see anyone rush in the bank to empty out the banks like they did during the first Great Depression, during the 20s and 30s in the Dust Bowl, right? But you saw drastic changes in America prior to, World War I or World War II in terms of industrialization and the government providing jobs and everything else, and civil infrastructure, roads being built, the Hoover Dam being built, and everything else, right? It was because we literally have nothing. And if we don't do something, the people are going to do something. And that's when, like, all of those giant federal job programs were created. The Great New Deal and all these other things, right? Is because the government realized if we don't do something, the people are probably going to try to change the government and the way things are going because they don't have their stuff. They don't have jobs. And that's the type of environment that would require that. Is that going to happen? I don't know. I think we have too much easy access to too many things here still in the United States for that to actually happen in my lifetime. But it's an interesting thought exercise. And we can avoid all of that if we just hold our government accountable and elect the right people and enact the right policies. Now, will that ever happen in my lifetime? I don't know. At the rate it's going right now, definitely not. And that's why this next election is going to be it's literally, I mean, literally everything's a South Park episode. It's going to be, giant douche versus turd sandwich, like, and you're just going to sit there and watch this nightmare. And it's just to be the continuation of the same policies.
But even
Over
if
and
you
over
elect,
again.
like, I don't really think we're a democracy anymore, but like the people's will.
Absolutely not.
But like,
Yeah,
so
we're not
even
a
if you elect the
democracy.
right people, what is it, 80% pretty bipartisan that want term limits for Congress? Do you
Mhm.
think that's going to get implemented? No.
So term limits is a good idea, but there's actually one aspect of this that people overlook. And this is actually comes to the time I spent when I was in DC, when I was actually going to these congressional members' offices and trying to push, for advocacy for change, with the Dark Saber Project, what I do outside of this discussion. You can elect all the congressmen and women you want and have all the turnover in whatever states that you want in general. But the biggest problem we have in how Congress runs currently is the staffers, because there is no way that any of these congressmen or women or senators have the time to read every bill that they go through and everything that's going on, everything that they're voting on. Who does that is the 100 to 200 staffers they have working for them. And they are the ones that set the agenda for the day for each of those elected members of Congress or the Senate. As they go, they read through all the stuff and they go, all right, we're going to bring up point 1 through 5 on economy today, point 4 through 6 on agriculture today, or whatever. We're going to give that to the congressman and tell them, hey, sir, we read through all the policies and based upon your platform, this is what we're going to vote on today. And they're completely clueless to what's actually going on. Like, it actually blew my mind. I'm like, this entire office is run by a bunch of 25-year-olds. Like, it's not run by this guy who's been in office for several terms already. It's run by a bunch of guys who are on, a defense fellowship, who they need to write a paper. And if they can get this bill passed, then they have a guaranteed job at Lockheed Martin, and they have to do this job for 3 years for this congressman. But he's the military policy advisor, right?
But what's the mechanism? Like, I agree with you that all that, the perma Washington folks, but that goes back to like incentives. If you are a congressman, if you can get rich in Congress, which you can get very rich. What incentive do you have not to? Maybe you're an honest person, but most people get co-opted. Let's just say that. But like the fact that these bills are so complicated that it requires 18 people to read it and then decipher it to you, like that's part of that whole system of like, let's obfuscate the truth. Let's do these omnibus spending bills. So if you want to fund Ukraine or you want to fund Social Security, you can't fund them separately. You got to fund them together. Sorry. It's just disgusting. And that's because of, in my opinion, the incentives. And the incentive is to get rich and fight for, and there's no balanced budget. So it's not like, hey, we're going to fund Ukraine. Okay, great. That means we're not funding this. It's not that. It's like we're going to fund Ukraine and then also do all the other things we want to do. And then that's because when we have a recession, this is why it's a massive problem, or the government wants to do UBI. There's no balanced budget. So if we have a recession, tax receipts go down. Does spending go down? No.
Nope.
Spending goes up.
I think so. Representative Matt Gaetz and even I think Representative Van Orden actually are pushing for the single spending bill initiative, which I fully support. It's our job in Congress is we're supposed to vote on these things, not combine them all with special interest groups and different select committees. It's like, this bill is only on funding. Are we giving $100 billion to Ukraine? Yes or no? No. All right. Next bill. Like they should have to go through like 100 bills a day. Single subject spending bills, I think, is actually the quickest way to induce positive change in the U.S. government is single subject spending bills. Get rid of the omnibus system, get rid of all these special committees, get rid of all these special interest groups. Is that Congress, and this is something that you can literally read in 15 seconds. Do we give money to this? Yes or no?
Yes.
Moving on. You know what I mean? Like, that's it. Then you can start talking about term limits and everything else. But getting rid of the omnibus spending system, it needs to go. It needs to be burned in the fire.
That's how they get rich.
Twice.
It's like page 47B, you'll see here we're funding this, and that's a special interest. That's how you get money.
And then it provides this company in my district additional funding because they're getting government kickbacks for providing 200 jobs to build air conditioners or something, right? Like, Yeah.
And a lot of
Yeah.
this is unproductive. Like, unlike the Hoover Dam and stuff like that, it's like, if the government, you can make an argument that the government government jobs program, to a certain degree, the military is that. You can argue that it's a good thing, a bad thing, whatever, or the size and all that kind of stuff. But a government jobs program where we are paying people to dig a hole and fill it back in, you can't argue how stupid that is. And there's a lot of government jobs programs in these omnibus spending bills that are just, hey, we're creating jobs. It's like, this is an unproductive job. It's green energy. Like, what the hell are you doing? You have a green energy factory, and anyone and their brother can tell you that it's more expensive, less dense, yada yada yada. And
that was actually one of the
unproductive.
points. Yeah, that was actually one of the points that even like Vivek Ramaswamy brought up in one of his most recent Republican debates. Like, day one, I'm firing everyone, half of the federal government with an odd social security number. I sat there and went, perfect. Like, if you got rid of half the size of the government, like, oh, then there's not enough people to provide the services to the American people. I'm like, that's not true, because most government jobs is like the old lady in Monsters Inc. in the basement with Mike Wazowski asking for files. They don't do anything. We're just paying them $80,000 a year to do nothing and collect benefits and collect money and do the middle. Anyone who's worked in the military has been to SCIFF, Central Issuing Facility. These are the most miserable people in the world, and they hate to work. They don't want to be there. They do everything they can to not do their job. So why don't we just get rid of them? We don't need it.
Yeah, I try to tell people, like, the way the government works, and if you've ever worked with them, like, go to the DMV, whatever, it's because the way I think, like, being in the military, what's the commander's intent, and then I'm going to work back to figure out a way to do it if you give me an order. But the way the military works is, how do we make this as humanly complicated as possible and add a step? So instead of one person doing a job, there's 7 people doing the job. One person hits the button on the printer, the other person grabs the paper from the printer, the other person hands it to it's
that
so
literally
stupid.
Happens too.
Yeah. It's so stupid, and your brain like melts from the stupidity. And that's majority. I'm not saying all government jobs, because I think there are some important ones, like in the military, if you believe in the military and all that, but majority of them, and that's the direction it always goes. It's like, let's add a step, and that step is completely purposeless. And the reason that they're allowed to do that is because there's no balanced budget. Like, even if it was inefficient, but you said, hey, you only have this much money to spend, figure it out. People, like, things would work themselves out to a certain degree, because you have to balance a budget. So if you want to waste money, 80 grand on paying somebody in the basement to stamp a piece of paper, then that's 80 grand you don't have somewhere else. But that's not how it works. They have 80 grand wherever they want.
And a lot of entrepreneurs and small businesses are forced to make those decisions, learn how to run lean and learn how to operate efficiently. But why isn't the government held to the same standard? Right?
They don't have to be. Yeah.
If you as a private company want to be profitable and you want to do these things, you're going to have to cut costs and learn how to be efficient and not waste money in order to maintain a decent revenue stream to support that business. But there's no incentive to do that in any government entity anywhere. I can't. And now that I think about it, I can't even name one efficient office in the U.S. government. I can't name one where it's like, yeah, we can cut this by 50% and we'd still be operating just fine. Oh, but you got rid of 10,000 jobs. It's like, so go find another job. Like, there's jobs. It's just jobs you don't want to do, that because it involves you like actually having to work.
Yeah, inefficient job. Like, if you are getting paid, and this only exists in the government, if you are getting paid and what you are doing is not contributing to more productive capacity, like, you can argue my job is not needed, or you can argue it's needed. I teach pilots how to survive if they ever eject. You can argue that that's needed or not needed in the military. But if I have a secretary on top of my job,
yeah, we don't need that. We don't need a secretary.
Do we need that? There's a lot of jobs out there where you're like, not necessary to any degree, but the way they do that in a company is they say, you are not adding to our bottom line. That's how you get hired on to a company. You say, I can add more money to your pocketbook than I cost you. And if you don't add more money to their pocketbook than you cost them, what's the point of them hiring you? And that is not a realization the government ever has to make. Like,
yeah, because there's no accountability to make them do that. You know what I mean? Like, it's Yeah, it's absolutely wild. I just don't understand where the breaking point is going to be on that. Like, I don't know when it's going to be. It could be tomorrow. It could be 50 years from now. But at some point, like, the money is going to run out, right?
I think the button will be inflation, because the government won't stop spending on their own. They won't come to this realization on their own. But the problem is, it's kind of like saying, maybe I should get my act together after you have $1 million in credit card debt and you make $80,000 a year. It's like, how do you get your act together? You don't, because the one thing that they cannot do is not pay interest on debt, because that means they can't take out more. So the interest alone on the debt, like on 34 trillion, like we're getting up to 5% interest rates. That's like almost 2 trillion a year in interest.
Yeah.
So, so it's too late is what I'm trying to say. That's why I think, like, I try to tell people, get on a lifeboat, because they ain't fixing it. They ain't, like, it's too late for the dollar-based system to fix itself, because for 30 years we've been overspending and we're just piling more wood on the fire expecting it to go out. And it's like, no.
I mean, that's why the Fed decided to keep rates low again over at least the holiday season, so everyone can get through Christmas before they jack it up into the 3 stages within the next 12 to 24 months. And people like, yeah, I could spend more money on. No. You can't spend more money on Christmas. You can't put yourself in more debt because the Fed locked interest rates down. That's not an incentive for you to go spend more money. But that's how many Americans who are financially illiterate think, right? But they don't understand, like, the Fed is going to have to raise rates. And personally, if you want my opinion, like I said, I'm all about cap. You know what? Just put their interest rates at 20% for like 2 years. You know what I mean?
Well, how does the government afford that then? Because
that's not my problem. I want to force Americans to stop being stupid and stop spending money and stop doing things. And that way, when they are forced into a very desperate financial position, then they're going to have to force accountability on the government to do those things, right? And it's not going to happen. But
I do agree with you. But the thing I think about, like, that's what they did in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
But the government could afford the interest. So, like, let's just say a thought experiment, the Fed, and I think the Fed's actually going to lower next year, because they don't give a crap about you, like you being in debt or your house. They don't care. What they're getting political pressure from Washington, because when the Fed raises interest rates, what that kind of matriculates throughout the economy, it raises what the government's fund rate is. So when the government sells treasuries and they say, hey, we're selling some debt because we can't afford our bills, so we have to borrow some money from you, which is what a bond is, that affects the bond rate, like how much the interest is. So my point being is, if we take in 4 trillion in taxes, which is about what we take in taxes, and interest alone at 5% is 2 trillion, you see the problem. Like, if they jack it up to 20%, like, our interest only on debt is like 4 times our tax receipts.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you can't take blood from a rock. Like, you can't tax your citizen.
Are you positive? Because I don't know, the rate we're going, I think they honestly think they can squeeze the rock hard enough. And if you just keep squeezing the rock, man, it's going to come eventually.
Like, I tell people this, like, I'm trying to be apolitical, but I'm like, listen, you can believe in whatever you want to believe in, cool. But if you want to spend money on X, Y, and Z, how much money you spend is the math question, and that's apolitical. What you spend money on is the political question. We haven't solved the math question, folks. And it's like, but what happens is, like, you want to spend money on gender research for butterflies, and you want to spend money in Ukraine. We don't have to decide between the two. We'll spend it on both, and everyone gets what they want. Yay! And eventually, that leads to devaluation of the currency. But real quick, I wanted to pivot to one thing, one last topic. I don't want to keep you all day, but
sure.
Speaking of money, the military is a big. When we're talking about the military, a lot of people say the military takes up, 50% of the budget. Well, 50% of the discretionary budget. So discretionary spending is less than half of total federal spending. The other half is we don't even vote on. It's just keeps going up with inflation. That's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and all that. But the military is dealing with a recruiting crisis. If you were to sum up, if you were king for a day and said, hey, here's the problem with recruiting, what would you say?
Oh, that's a good question. The problem with recruiting right now is that many Americans, especially young Americans, do not feel that there's anything worth fighting for, because they think that the system is so occluded right now, and there's so much political division between different, whether it's gender ideology, political ideology, religious ideology, that there is no moral, ethical basis that they believe is worth dying for, right? And because they come in, and you're not even allowed to be religious in the military anymore, you're shunned, or you identify with this or that, or vice versa, and you're criticized, or you're punished for it, or you're retaliated against, or I'm going to join the military as a female and I'm almost guaranteed to get raped or sexually assaulted. Why would I go do that job? There's no reason for me to do that job, because I could just go get another job in the US and do that. Like, they don't see any value in being an American, which I think is sad, right? Fundamental values as an American are important. Like, to many people, at least in my, we are supposed to be the light of the world, so to speak. And we're supposed to be the demonstration of what freedom and constitutional rights are. But when our own constitutional rights and our own freedoms are constantly being taken and destroyed, then what are we actually defending? And then you sit there and go, oh, I see what we're doing. We're just sending the billions of dollars of equipment to Ukraine, and then we're watching World War I in real time with DJI drones and thermite grenades strapped to it. Is that worth dying for? Like, is that legitimately worth dying for? And I think many young Americans would say no. Even Zelensky came on the news yesterday, literally was telling Americans, like, this is on video, I even posted on my Instagram, Americans, give us your money and stop crying, because Putin's bad, and we're here to fight for freedom and democracy. And I sat there and went, man, I swear I've heard this line stated somewhere in the last 20 years, that we're here fighting for freedom and democracy at any cost. And at the end of the day, they're not fighting for freedom and democracy. Like, that is not what that entire conflict is. And I think we have literally shoveled hundreds of billions of dollars into that country, and it has not made anything better, and has not changed the situation on the ground at all. At all. And
some can argue it made it worse, because it elongated the conflict, more death.
Oh, that was my argument on like week one working Intel and CENTCOM. I'm like, this isn't going to go well. Everyone, shut up, Dorito. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, okay. I mean, this is literally my job, but here we are, over a year later. And I'm like, I told you so, like that's, and Putin knows that, right? Putin, everyone says he's an idiot and he's crazy and he's a psychopath. And I'm like, yeah, but he's a genius, because he knows he's taking advantage of the situation. It's going to benefit his country. It's increased his industrial base, because now people have even more jobs. So they got to fund their war machine and their military industrial complex. And now they're making all the rules with the oil trafficking and all the weapons trades. And then they say, so do you guys want to be partners with us? Because we could provide you all this access and freedom and security. And we also work with China with the Belt and Road Initiative. Or you guys want to keep doing stuff with the West? It's completely up to you. But we're not stopping, because no one's stopping us, because they can't, because they're out of money. Like, we screwed the Russians over in the space race by making them outspend their economy. And now it's almost like, well, my, how the turntables, because now we're doing it to you, and we're getting you back for the whole Cold War thing. And they're trying to reinvigorate the idea of having the USSR in some capacity again. They're literally using our game plan that we used during the space race against us now in real time in Ukraine.
Yeah, and that doesn't even include us poking the bear over the last 30 years and expanding NATO and talking about.
Correct. We would never allow Russia to park nuclear missiles in Mexico.
Yeah.
And people act so surprised that, like, why are they so mad about us parking nuclear missiles in Turkey and Poland? It's like, well,
I mean, I could tell you what would happen. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Yeah.
We didn't like that so much.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And people don't get that, because Americans are so isolated in this island between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. They forget there's an entire world out there, which is why I encourage people, go travel, go see the world, go see that you're not the most important thing on this planet.
Yeah, I was wondering, I was in Afghanistan in 2019, and there was Georgians there, the country. And Georgia's not part of NATO. It's like, what the hell are Georgians doing here? They weren't there as military contractors. They were there in the military capacity. And it starts to make sense now. We're trying to expand NATO. Remember, I think it was Russia invaded Georgia 2013. I can't remember. But it's like, dude, the enemy gets a vote. So whatever you want to say about bad Putin guy and he's Hitler and la 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 la. Okay, fine. Put your money where your mouth is. You know what that means? That means NATO boots on the ground. Do you want to play that game? Like
Exactly.
and we've been that's the thing that kind of bothers me about this like freedom narrative, or like that it benefits the United States, like where we go to war. It benefits certain people in the United States. I don't think it benefits Americans. I think it benefits certain rich politicians who are the war hawks, and they benefit. And it's very disgusting that they would put people's lives at risk for their own pocketbook, but that's where we are. And that's kind of been the war narrative everywhere we've been the last couple of years. Like, have we made the world a better place because we were in Afghanistan for 20 years? We invaded Iraq. Like, how many times are the Americans going to be like, they hear the beatings of the war drums? And I do start to see people are like, I don't really trust what you're saying anymore.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that.
Beating. Yeah.
I've definitely seen that recently. And there's also there's one new component that I don't think a lot of people are talking about too, is the new Genesis medical system that the military just enacted. I think that has a significant effect on recruiting right now. So, and the reason I know about this is because I just transferred back to the federal side. So I went from National Guard to Reserve, right? There is this new computer system being used by the U.S. military and MEPS, military entrance processing, called Genesis. Now, even like I didn't have any major medical issues when I was growing up, right? But there's some kids who like had asthma when they were 5, or they took antidepressants because their parents put them on Ritalin because that was like all the rage in the 2000s, right? And now when you join the military, all they have to do is type in your social security number, and all your digitized medical records, which has been more of a thing in the past 20 years, that's the recruiting age now, at 18 years old, right, is now information to the military, and they know everything that happened to you. So you can't just go into your recruiting office, don't ever tell me you had asthma, because that's an instant disqualifier. And people got away with it from the kids in the 80s and the 90s, because there was no centralized computer system that the government had access to. But now, even in MEPS, like I was in MEPS, and half the kids who were there couldn't join because they took Ritalin when they were 13, or they had an inhaler when they were 4, and it's an immediate disqualifier. So there was a kid in the Army who had a 575 ACFT score, perfect health, varsity athlete, like the quintessential all-American kid who should join the Army, and he wants to join the Army. And he was not allowed to join the Army because he had an inhaler and had asthma when he was 5 years old, and it came up populated in the Genesis system, and it instantly disqualified him permanently from service, right? So there is actually a major recruiting crisis.
Unless there's a draft. Now,
the classic go-to is everything is waiverable, right? And there is the ability to go through the waiver process for those things, but the military system is so backed up, and the bureaucracy is so convoluted with medical, waivers, is that none of these 18-year-old kids who just graduated high school or considering going to college are going to spend 1 to 3 years going through the waiver process to get a $28,000 a year job. They're not. They're the instant generation, right? They want it now. Generation Z and Generation Alpha want it now. I want to join the military. This is a good idea. I'm in it now. Wait, I got to wait 2 or 3 years and live with my parents? Nah, I'm just going to get a job and go to college. I'm good. You know what I mean? No. So that's actually another contributing factor. So not only have Americans lost their sense of self and their sense of purpose and what it means to be an American, to want to serve and protect those rights, which I believe is a fundamental, existential issue in the military, but also it's some of the new systems they brought online. And the Genesis medical system is definitely kicking recruiting in the teeth, because these recruiters are just like, I brought in 30 kids and only 5 of them can join, and there's nothing I can do about it.
No.
That's it. And it disqualifies them instantaneously. So
yeah, like what the military is doing, I agree with everything you're saying. We were talking before we started recording, like, this is a lot of money. So the Air Force is now, and this tells you how desperate the military is. And the fact that somebody wouldn't take this also tells you a lot, right? So the Air Force is now offering up to $600,000 in bonuses to keep pilots. Why are pilots leaving in droves? And I work at a fighter squadron, so I see this a lot. And then in active duty, people want to get out. They're like, my opinion, people join the military for one of two reasons. And depending on your job, I can kind of guess what your reason was. Patriotism or desperation, money. So money in that basket is like education benefits and all the stuff that comes with the military. But what you want is people to join for patriotism, because that means they're not for sale. They're going to do the right thing when they're told to do so, et cetera, et cetera. They join for a purpose. That is going away. And the people that did join the military for a purpose, they're starting to believe that that purpose doesn't exist anymore for a lot of different reasons. The military has been politicized. All the wars that have been fought the last couple of years, they realized they were lied to about them. And then we were talking before we started recording, the cost. There's a lot of cost to being in the military. And one is being away from your family and all the stuff that comes with that. Divorce, being away from your kids, missing their first steps, missing births, and all that kind of stuff. That can be worth it if you're fighting for something. But what if you're fighting for nothing?
Mhm.
Like, and that realization comes to you 10 years after, and you're divorced, you don't have access to your kids, you're in debt. All these things are causing people to really take a look back. And I don't know if you've experienced this with people in the military, but I have, conversations with people offline that they're really depressed about their military service, not because of what they did, but the reason they did it was a lie.
Yeah, 100%. And there's also a lot of caveats to that $600,000. Like, just a few years ago, it was $500,000. So they upped it $100,000 since then. But now the new contract is you have to commit to additional 12 years of federal active service. And they also don't tell you that it's taxed, right? So for an extra $50,000 a year on average, that's untaxed. So after that, maybe $38,000. In addition to your average salary with incentives is probably around $80,000 to $90,000. So for $110,000 to $120,000 a year, maybe you're locked in that for 12 more years of this bullshit system. Is that worth it to you? Now, to a lot of young 22-year-olds who just got out of pilot training, don't do it. It's not worth it, man. $600,000 is not worth it. Like, I make more money than that per year, and I don't have to deal with the military bureaucracy. You know what I mean? I sit there and go, looks like it sucks. And then I go home. You know what I mean? And I stay.
How's the weather out there?
Yeah, and I stay on the reserve side. Like, if you really want to stay in for that long because you want to be a patriot, I suggest staying in the Guard and the reserve side, because you only have to deal with the circus a couple days a month, so to speak, right? But to stay in for an additional 12 years for an additional $50,000 a year, well, that's why it's so easy for United and American Airlines and Southwest to walk in and say, how about we give you a $200,000 signing bonus with a guaranteed $150,000 a year for you to come fly for us now? Right. And that's why so many pilots are leaving the military now. A lot of my friends in my class. So, I mean, I'm from the class of 2010 at the Air Force Academy, and a lot of my friends are majors getting ready to go to the lieutenant colonel board this year. And they're just like, hey, you couldn't give me $4 million to stay in for another 12 years. I'm leaving right now. I'm going to go fly cargo for UPS for $200,000 a year, and I'm going to see my kids every night. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way that $600,000 for 12 is worth 12 years of my life.
Oh no. And then, so you get paid more, you work less. And as soon as you shut that engine off, you're done working, right? There's no like, hey, did you submit your leave? Did you fill out this form? Did you
fill out DTS?
Yes. And so, and all that BS, like I tell people, there's a sense of duty that keeps some people in, right?
Yeah.
And it's not to say whenever you get out, you've served your time, whatever, but that duty, I feel like, is leaving, because they have a duty to what? To go to war in Afghanistan for 20 years for nothing?
Or Ukraine.
To defend Ukraine?
Yeah.
It's like a duty to what? Like, that's what I think is killing, as you stated, military recruiting. Now the question is, does it get better? Because I don't think it's affected retention yet, but it's gonna. Like you just mentioned, your friends, you'd have to pay me $4 million to get me to stay in. Yes, I would agree with that. A lot of people are experiencing that. Like, as soon as they hit their 20, bouncing, see ya.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain point where you're like vested, and you're like, well, I got to stay into 20. But a lot of people are leaving, and the question is, as they can't recruit enough people, they don't cut the stupid duties. They just farm them out to the people who are remaining, and so now they're adding to the workload. And a lot of that workload is unproductive, as we already discussed. It's just stupid stuff. And now people have more work to do that are in. What's going to keep them in? And I don't think this problem is going to fix itself without massive changes. And the way I talk to people, like, if you're in a company, you have some recourse, right? You don't have a ton of recourse in the military. There's no like a union.
There's no HR department.
Yeah, you're like, excuse me. So it's like the union, like, is people not joining, people getting out. Like, if those things start happening, those are people in the military telling you something, and they're telling you you're screwing up big time. And both of those things are happening. I think retention is going to happen. But so my question is, as this perpetuates, I don't see a reason it would get better. What do you think the draft would look like if we had to have one in here in the United States? Like, all the people not joining.
So that's, like I said, like, so actually the Genesis system would make that very interesting, because with the amount of so-called everyone having a mental health crisis since COVID now, instant disqualifier. Then you have all the cases of myocarditis coming out now that they're realizing that there was multiple vaccine injuries that people aren't recognizing. And, well, can't join them. You know, the new in the 2024 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, do you know what is now going to be required for you to join the military?
A vaccine?
You have to take an EKG.
Why?
Kidding. No, I shit you not. Look it up. Why are they mandatory requiring EKGs? Because we've had so many people just have heart attacks and drop dead in the military in the past year for some weird reason that they won't. You know, I'm not trying to be conspiracy theorist. I'm telling you, like, this is really happening. There is really happening that there are young people and healthy people that are having medical issues and being diagnosed with myocarditis now and in the military. And it is definitely affecting medical readiness for sure. And
it's
now
gone up. What is it? I saw it on Terminal CWO, the DMEDS, Defense Medical. Basically, they track these things, and one of the docs says it's gone up 900%.
Yeah, and that guy got censored, and he lost his job and lost his rank, and he's getting like discharged. It's turning into this whole thing because their argument is he released HIPAA information, so they're going to fire him now. It's like, that's not how that works. But regardless, is now, even at 18 years old, in order to join the military, you're going to be required to have an EKG to make sure that you don't have any heart conditions before you're allowed in the military. And who knows what the effect of the population is going to be on, because it was technically a forced vaccination program amongst most of the American population. So is that going to limit our ability to even have recruits in the military for the next 10 to 20 years? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I can say if those trends that we've seen in the past several months continue, it would definitely have an effect on the ability for the draft to be effective.
Well, never forget, I never put anything past the government. In Vietnam, they had something called McNamara's Morons, where they're drafting mentally handicapped people and sending them to Vietnam.
Well, yeah, like I said, once again, there's a South Park episode on this. It's called Operation Black Shield, and they made all the minorities go into Canada first. You know what I mean? So, I mean, and that sounds terrible, but I mean, like,
right. We want to be diverse.
As much of a joke as that is, like, in terms of, like, yes, I'm making a South Park reference, like, they're just showing the idiocy of our own government and how it operates, because, like, they would do something like that. You know what I mean? Even the forced diversity programs in the pilot community now that I've talked to, it's where they're purposely keeping qualified pilots out of the cockpit because they don't meet the demographics that make them look good. And it's called America's Class. And that was actually instituted by General Brown, who is now the current Joint Chiefs of Staff guy, right? He took over for Milley. And literally I know kids in the Air Force Academy who have pilot slots, who've been on casual status for 1 to 2 years, waiting pilot training, who happen to be white, straight males. And they're on casual status waiting to go to training because there's this group of people being pushed through pilot training who, one, never wanted to be pilots. They wanted to do something else. They're being forced to go there because they want to go to pilot training. And normally people, and I discussed this before, but like people who know who've gone to pilot training know if you fail a class, you get rolled back with the previous class, and your class keeps going on because they got to get people through training. They got to get people in cockpits. But what they're doing with this America's Clash is they're trying to get all these guys to graduate together. So if 1 or 2 or 3 guys or girls fail, then they roll everyone back and everyone has to repeat everything. So now the pipeline's way backed up. The pipeline's backed up like 2 to 3 years in pilot training. And there's been multiple Class A mishaps in pilot training across the board, whether it's the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy now. And that's why, like, my roommate was an instructor pilot at Laughlin, and he literally said, dude, these kids are going to kill me, and they're forcing me to make them become pilots. And some of these kids just don't want to fly. They don't want to be here, but they're being forced to because they fit a narrative. And he's like, I dropped my retirement paperwork. I'm getting out because I want to go home to my wife and kids every night. I'm here to train pilots who want to be here. And the people who really want to be pilots who are qualified, I'm not saying they're not getting kicked out. They're not losing their pilot slot, but they're being put on casual status for such a long period of time because they're backing up the pipeline. And then you can go into the maintenance issues and that whole diatribe of aircraft maintenance can't even keep up because they can't even get guys into maintainer school. Maintenance officers can't even keep up with the workload because, you know, everything's being tagged on these aircraft and they don't have the parts and supply because we're sending all of our resources to other countries and other conflicts who need the parts for all the stuff that we're utilizing, right? So, I mean, even look at the Osprey incident, right? It just killed another 8 guys in the Air Force, and now all those aircraft are grounded. And now the United States Army thinks it's a good idea to replace the Black Hawk with the Valor system, which is a worse version of the Osprey. You know, and it's like, you know what? I wouldn't get in the Valor. I don't care that you, but we tested it. I don't care. You know, helicopters of auto rotation, those things do not. And you know what happens in the Army a lot? A lot of helicopters crash. So
yeah, dude. Yeah, I think, dude, I'm gonna have to look up that NDAA EKG.
That's wild. Yep, it's
that's dark
now.
That's another thing that I'm like, at the very least, like, it was an illegal order. Well, it was legal because it had to be, as Terminal CWO said, it had to be FDA approved, and nothing was FDA approved when they forced you to get it. But what that means is you have no recourse because you consented to be experimented on, even though you were forced to do it. That is some dark stuff. And if that dark stuff, like what it appears to look like, is that has no positive effects and potentially negative ones for that forced vaccine campaign, why wouldn't you want to join that organization? That seems like a great organization. One that tramples on your constitutional rights and tells you to shut up and experiments on you. It's like, dude, that is going to be, if that actually plays out, that's going to be one of the darkest chapters in humanity ever. I feel like, if what we appears to be true is true, and the military was ordered to do it or get out.
Yep.
And some people, under other than honorable circumstances, just disgusting.
But now you can apply back to the Board of Corrections and Military Records for your respective service to have your records corrected. And, you know, but anyone who's been through that process, like I have 6 freaking times, it takes years for that stuff to go through. And you think people are going to waste their time and money and lawyer fees in order to get their records changed, like you have another thing coming to you. But once again, that's a system that's controlled by the military bureaucracy. And instead of just giving justice to these people and having the records corrected and letting them continue to serve, you're now not incentivizing an entire population of people who want to serve because they saw what happens. Like, why would you want to join the military if this is how you're going to be treated by that organization? There's no incentive to. So I'm not going to. I'm just going to go do another job. You know?
So what advice, like, let's say you have a hard charging, let's say it's your relative, somebody you love and care about. Hard charging kid wants to join the military today. What advice would you give that person about joining?
So someone asked me this question the other day, and I'm going to give the same answer. And even though this is not in reference to going to a federal service academy directly, but my first question to anyone joining the military is, why do you want to join the military? You know, oh, I want to go for money. I want to go for college. And I'm like, nope, you shouldn't be joining. Those aren't reasons. I mean, they are incentives, but they're not reasons. And my answer to them is, if you are not willing to lay down your life in order to lead the men and women to be assigned underneath you and do your job and absolutely call out any types of corruption in order to do the right thing, putting up with that system because it's going to happen because it's the U.S. military, then don't join. Don't join.
No.
You have to be willing to be that patriot and to do the right thing and be infallible in your word and your duty and being able to stand up against your chain of command if things going wrong and protecting your guys. Because at the end of the day, it will happen. War will occur. Conflicts will occur. You will get deployed, right? But if you don't have that moral foundation to as why you're wearing the uniform, that it's bigger than you, right? It's about an idea. It's about the Constitution, and those things are important. Because if we don't have people serving under those pretenses, then you're going to have mutiny and anarchy within the military ranks in a really bad wartime situation. So if they want to join, my question would be why? And if it's not, I'm willing to lay down my life in order to protect the constitutional rights of all Americans against all enemies, foreign and domestic, in the sense, then maybe this isn't the job for you. Yeah.
And I think people who are in, I love that answer. People who are in are feeling like there's some of the best people I've ever met in my life are in the military. Some of the worst people I've ever met in my life, but you get exposed to things in the military in situations where you get a lot of camaraderie that you don't get in other jobs. But I do think people are realizing it's an uphill battle right now. Like that's not the people in charge of you at the 4-star rank and et cetera don't necessarily agree with what you just said.
Well, they don't. And people understand, like, things will get hard in the military. Things will suck. Things will be unfair. You will sweep the motor pool. You're going to scrub some bathrooms, and you're going to count a lot of boxes in those connexes, so to speak, right? That is guaranteed. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to look at the bigger picture in your mind and go, all that matters is the guy underneath me and making sure that the mission gets done. He or she goes home safe every day and comes back. That's it.
Yep.
That's the baseline for it. So sign up for like a 2-year contract. Don't take the $600,000 and jump in for 12 off the bat. Don't suggest that. That's not a good idea. But go in, test the waters if you really want to do it, but do it for the minimal amount of time required. So if you do have a different epiphany later on, you're not locked into perpetuating and becoming bitter and becoming negative and then becoming part of the problem and not the solution.
I like that. Yeah. Well, Adam, we've been going for what, an hour and 37 minutes. So we'll have to do this again another time.
Absolutely, man.
Talk for hours. But where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, so best way to find me is adam.derito on Instagram. And then you guys can visit my website, adamderito.com. And if you need to email me about any legal assistance or retaliation in the military, which is mostly what I focus on, you can email me at darksabre, SABRE productions.com, at gmail.com. So,
yeah, Adam does a lot of good work advocating for those in the military who have been wrong. So I appreciate that. And I'll have him back on. I love these conversations. He has a lot of interesting thoughts about geopolitics. Basically, any subject I bring up, you probably thought about it. So that's good stuff. Awesome, man. Appreciate you coming back on. Hope you have a Merry Christmas. I'll have you stay around after I hit stop so we can talk offline. But thanks for coming back on, and Merry Christmas to you.
Yeah, you as well.
All right. Later, brother.